not just academically, but holistically, so that you can maximize your overall well-being while at the same time succeeding in school. Oh. My name is Marta Elliott, and I'm a professor of sociology and also chair of the Department of Sociology. And this is a picture of me that you can sort of see, since you don't see my whole face. From a couple years ago, I'm the one in the middle at graduation. I've been teaching at UNR for 25 years. When I came here, I had an infant. That's how I keep track. He's 25 now. And I've been involving students in my research, both as research subjects and research participants. I specialize in the sociology of mental health, and I've published over 50 scientific studies on this subject. Many of them are co-authored with my current or my former students. I also have a fair amount of personal experience with mental health issues, and I'm going to share a little bit of that with you today, I hope, for your benefit. We're going to start today's session by talking about what's happened to us over the past year and a half or so, and how it's affected at least some of us psychologically. Then I'm going to flash back and tell you what happened to me when I was a college student, in the hopes that the same thing will not happen to you. And then after sharing my story, we're going to talk through some strategies about how to live life in college that keeps us healthy and happy, and develop a sense of belonging on campus, which is incredibly important. And then we'll talk a little bit about what to do if things are not going well and what resources are already in place. So feel free to write down questions, because there will be time for questions and discussion and a little exercise when I'm done talking. So this is kind of going to go from some serious material, some really heavy material, where I might cry, and then it's going to be very uplifting. So that is the plan. So prepare yourself. How does this look? Next slide, please. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
There we go. Okay. So the question I start with is, what has happened to us? About 17 months ago, as you all know, the previously unimaginable took place. UNR announced that owing to the rapid spread of COVID-19, all in-person classes were going remote, and everyone except for essential workers had to start working or taking classes from home. No doubt something similar happened to most of you, except you were probably a senior in high school. Is that right? Okay, you're amazing. You're a junior and now you're a freshman. Whoa. Oh, that's because some people just decided to finish, right? Graduate early. That's true. It's been going on for a year and a half. It happened your junior year. Gotcha. So anyway, it was surreal at first. It was unbelievable. It was bizarre. But then it became a way of life. This campus was pretty deserted. I came occasionally, even as department chair. I worked from home. Our only form of social interaction was with our students. It became via Zoom, just like for you. People like me were lucky enough to be able to work from home and still get paid, but a lot of people lost their jobs, including some of you might have lost a job, or for sure someone in your family did, and then was on the phone 24/7 trying to get unemployment benefits. So people have really struggled. And at the same time, we got really interested, I know I did, in learning more about this virus and figuring out, how can I not get this? I do not want this, right? And I especially don't want to give it to anyone else, because the thought of, I'm healthy, I'm fairly young, but if I give it to somebody else, they might die. It's very scary stuff. So I did my research, everyone else did. We were very careful. Things, if you're not from here, you might not know, but in January, things were so bad, January 2021, that literally 1 in 12 people in Washoe County was actively infected with COVID-19. That was the peak. I followed it. I was obsessed every day. I did my, and then of course, I was one of them. That's my positive test. So I had it, I recovered, obviously. I'm sure many of you have also now had a case of it. And I hope not many, but some of you have probably seen people you love be very sick and even die. Next slide, please.
I think
What?
I think it's you have
I have to do it? Okay.
it's just delayed. Here,
Let me try it from over here. With the mouse. There's the mouse. Yeah, I clicked twice with this mouse and that
Perfect.
worked. This I can't get to. All right, so now what's happening? Okay, so as you know, about a year into this whole thing, we got the exciting news that the vaccines were starting to appear effective. We're like, wow, that's fast, but good. And then they started becoming available. And soon those long testing lines that some of you saw outside of renowned South Meadows, they turned into long lines of people getting their shots. And so more and more people were getting their shots. I'm sorry you're not wearing your mask properly. Thank you. Okay. And then things started to look better. And then I don't know the exact date, but much to our amazement, the CDC made this announcement that if you're vaccinated, you can take off your mask. I'm like, oh, really? And then we thought, okay. And then life started going back to normal and people started going out again. And that's why I showed these people kind of dancing. It was,
I'm gonna move it.
that little camera with those, it's blocking some of my slide. Can you minimize that? Perfect. There we go. See the people dancing? We were really happy. So things are going well. But as you know, just very, very recently, things have kind of gone backwards. And we'll look a little bit at the data about that, but the mask mandate came back. Next slide, please. So this is this COVID dashboard that I'm always checking. This is today, and it shows you the data for Washoe County. And it shows you, for example, that little yellow, 182 new cases yesterday. It shows you the trends, but on the far right of each of these graphs, that little upward trend is what's going on. That's the rising cases that are happening here in August, even after that long, long plateau of a really nice, good period. The other kind of freaky thing that you see on here is that number 516. Those are people fully vaccinated who still got it, right? Now, most people who are getting it aren't vaccinated, but the bottom line is, next slide, please, that you can even get it if you're vaccinated. Typically, you won't get very sick, but as you know, you could be very contagious. So that fear of hurting other people is still really there. And this slide is also from the same website. It just shows you the rate of transmission right here where we live right now is rated very high and approaching critical. So am I nervous again? Yeah, we should all be cautious. Okay, next slide. Yet, we're also full of hope. I mean, my God, this is the first week of college for you. This is one of the most exciting moments in many of your lives. I know it was for me. And I haven't lost hope at all that we're going to get past this pandemic. And I just want to acknowledge that despite we're still in, this is a tremendously exciting moment for you this whole week. And I hope that, I know it's stressful, but I hope that many of you are feeling all of that joy and anticipation, and that we're staying hopeful that we're going to get through this and it's going to end. At the same time that we're full of hope, the fact is that this pandemic has had these psychological effects across our population. Next slide, please. So this graphic depiction shows you some data that the federal government collects, called the Pulse survey, I think. It's always asking these questions. These are representative of adults in the US, and they ask them, like, over the past week, on how many days have you felt anxious or depressed? And these numbers show you this upward trend. So in January to June, that's before the pandemic, you see how low the bar is. Less than 10% of people were feeling anxious or depressed. People were okay. Then we go to May, 2 months into the pandemic, and it's gone way up. So on the far right, you see a third of people are feeling symptoms of anxiety and depression. This is the general public. And then on the far right, by the time we get to the end of 2021, it's the holiday season. It was very dark, if you remember. Like we're close to 40% of people depressed or anxious. Next slide, please. And those people, that's the general population. It doesn't even mean that they got COVID, right? So it's had this effect on people in general for the reasons I've been talking about, the financial insecurity and the fear and all the stressors. But for people who've actually had COVID and recovered, like me and some of you, there are also mental health effects just of learning that you had it. So research has shown, and I cite the study in the bottom here, that even after people physically recover, they sometimes have symptoms like ongoing post-traumatic stress. It was a trauma and the symptoms of stress stick around for a while, or anxiety or depression or trouble sleeping. And these things can last. That's part of what they call long haul COVID. They can last for a while. We don't know why. Is it neurological? Is it something the virus does? Is it psychological? Is it both? But it's real. Next slide, please. Okay. Yeah. Remember, I'm still moving in the downward trend with the darkness, so we will be coming to the light. So, college students. I want to make you even more worried, but that's what this talk is about. And even before the pandemic, there was something everybody was talking about, the college student mental health crisis. Over a decade, researchers had been tracking college students and noticing this steady rise in the number of students who were saying they were feeling anxious or depressed or thinking about suicide. Too many students. In other words, a common problem. Something that I'm here to talk about how to avoid or what to do if it were to happen. So why is this the case? So researchers have several thoughts about why this is the case. Uncertainty, which I'll talk about each one, they're listed there. The uncertainty of being in college there's a lot of it. Right now, you're not sure what your classes are going to be like next week or your instructors. You're not even sure if how you're going to get through out of it, which you will. But next week you'll have new classes, new assignments. Some of you are going to be like, I'm not sure I can do this. So it's very normal to be worried about your ability to get it all done. Many students are shy about asking for help. It takes a while for many people to figure out what to major in. People worry about what's going to happen after graduation. All of that is just part of the package, but those kind of worries can pile up, and it's just good things to talk about and recognize our normal feelings. Some people have even more pressing concerns, like they can't afford the tuition or their rent or their food. And we have a fair amount of food insecurity on this campus. So while many students are fine, many are also economically struggling. So that's another reason why they might be anxious and depressed. And then another problem is just that sense of belonging that I mentioned. It isn't necessarily instantaneous that you feel a sense of belonging. Some people, it takes a while to warm up, and even in a large crowd, you feel alone or you worry. Everybody else seems like they know what's going on and they're making friends. What's wrong with me? Also, a very normal feeling, okay? So we're gonna talk about ways of developing that sense of belonging. Next slide, please. Okay, so one slide before, I'm not quite there yet. So this is since COVID. This slide shows about how these problems of depression and anxiety that I mentioned have risen even more dramatically, which is not surprising, but it's just documented. And the point that I want to make about this study that I'm citing says that upwards of 40% of students last year met criteria for depression or anxiety. That's really through the roof. Does that mean that suddenly all these people developed a brain disorder, and all it took was a pandemic. I disagree with that hypothesis as a sociologist. I think what's going on is that we're having a very normal reaction to a very abnormal situation. What's abnormal is outside of us. It's what's happening in the world and the stresses that it's putting on us. So people who are feeling anxious and depressed are not alone. It's 4 out of 10 people right now. So now, next slide, please. So flashback, if you will, to 1985. Most of you don't remember that year. But that was when I was a college junior at Oberlin College, which is a small liberal arts school in a small town over in Ohio, in the middle of nowhere. They wouldn't like me to say that, but you can kind of see from the picture. And you can tell from this photo of me that I personally think my hair was incredible. I mean, gorgeous, but otherwise, I was not feeling very well. That was naturally curly, by the way. It kind of stopped doing that. But anyway, I wasn't only not feeling very well, I was extremely ill. Oh, and it looked like I was a lot heavier, but actually I had collagen in my face. You can't tell, it's all gone. Anyway, I was really ill. And I'm going to tell you this because it's good for other people to know what can happen and hopefully prevent it. So by my junior year in college, and this had been building for me for at least 6 years, I was seriously depressed, very alienated, and I was paranoid. I was so paranoid that I stopped talking to people. I would not talk to any students or teachers. I had 1 or 2 friends I still talked to a little bit. I wasn't talking because I was afraid of what they would think of me. I was afraid they could tell. I completely lost my mind. I had stopped going to classes because I hadn't done my homework, and I can imagine, like, I was a good student. I was horrified. I wasn't doing my homework, but I couldn't do it because my brain had stopped working. I couldn't read. I couldn't write a coherent sentence, and pretty soon I couldn't speak coherently at all. And then I started getting lost, even in places that I knew. And finally, the final straw was I started hearing voices. So I was seriously ill. Next slide, please. Fortunately, though, the good news is I had gone to the student counseling center. I knew I wasn't okay. And I was talking to somebody there, and I called him and I'm like, I'm hearing voices, I'm lost, you know. I recognized something was wrong with me, and he gave me very good advice and said, we actually are 2 hours away from this incredible mental hospital called Harding Hospital. I recommend that you go there immediately, which I did. And it was an incredibly good decision. It's a very scary thing to acknowledge that you need psychiatric help, and it was much more hush-hush 40 years. This is 40 years ago, hard to believe, but it was much more hush-hush then than it is now. But I went there. To make a long story short, I spent 14 months in that hospital. I got all kinds of therapy, mostly therapy, not medication, therapy, one-on-one, in groups, art therapy, dance therapy, exercise, everything. What had happened to me is I had experienced multiple traumas in my young life. And I know they're traumas that some of you have experienced too. I hope nobody had as many as I did. I will just tell you briefly, I had a big load. I had my father leave my mother when I was 9, when we were living abroad. And then that was very hard. We came back to the US. 5 years later, out of the blue, my father just keeled over dead from a heart attack. That was very hard. And then I went into kind of a daze, and a couple months after that, unfortunately, I met somebody, and within a half an hour, he raped me in a parking garage. So that was the last of the major traumas that happened to me when I was at that point 15. But I just went on like normal, continued to go to school, tried to succeed. I did well for a while. I kept doing pretty well for quite a while, actually. But gradually it took its toll and I became sicker and sicker until that all of it happened. So traumas can cause mental illness. And if you don't address them near the time that they happen and get help and talk through them, eventually they get you. So this is one of the reasons I tell my story. If any of you have even one of those traumas that you are feeling like you need to talk about, don't put it off. There's time in your day for it. You don't want to get this as sick as I did. Next slide. So that was kind of the depths of the talk. It gets better. I'm better. I got better. That place saved me. I went back to college. I finished. I was able to do everything again, just like I had before. My brain worked even better. I then went to graduate school. I then became a professor, and I'm standing here in front of you today telling you that having a mental illness, even one as severe as the one I just described to you, which is nothing minor, in no way will prevent you from living up to your full potential. And I want you to know that if there's anyone who has any doubt about that, look at me. Next slide. So the rest of this talk, what I'm gonna discuss are what I call kind of preventative strategies for what you can do now as you're planning out your schedule to maximize your emotional well-being. And then if anything were to go wrong or already is wrong, how you can get help on this campus. So you might want to be thinking about, as I go through some different ideas that I have for you, some of it's based on research. I'm not going to bore you with research. We're just going to talk. Maybe think of what applies to you, because each of us have our own ways of coping. So I just have a lot of ideas for you to consider. So let's go to the next slide. Work your body. Okay, this is one of my major therapeutic activities that I do that always makes me feel better. I mean, we do it for our physical health. We do it because we like to look fit, but I think at least half the benefit of exercise is for our brains. It makes us happier. And that little picture in the corner up there is a study that I read about how it makes your brain work better mentally in terms of your schoolwork. So if you need any excuse to go to the gym, like if I work out now, I'm going to actually be able to do a much better job on that paper I have to write. It's true. So lots of good reasons to go. And this fitness center we have, it's only been here, what, 2 years? It's beautiful. And of course, your membership's included. You pay for it. You can use it. They have so many great classes. I'm a member. I love it there. They have like a class for whatever you're into at the moment.
They go to the fitness center after this.
Yeah, you're already going. So you know about it. Good. But the only thing I want to say about the fitness center that you might not know about or nobody might have said is that some people are anxious about going there because everybody's looking at, I'm in my workout clothes. I'm self-conscious. I'm not that good. Well, they're probably thinking the same thing. So forget about that. That's my only advice. Just speaking from my own experience. Okay, next slide, please. So another thing, when the smoke finally blows away, is to get outside. And, I've lived here 25 years. I've never lived in a more beautiful area for doing things outside. And going outdoors is so renewing. You can, of course, exercise. You can also just sit and meditate. But it is extremely therapeutic and good for you to spend time outside. And some of these pictures that I'm sharing, my own photos on the right, are some hikes that are right nearby. Like if you go down to Hidden Valley, I don't know if any of you have ever climbed up there. There's a pyramid that somebody built. You also run into the wild horses. That's a fun hike. There's a cone peak. It's kind of hard to see, but when you drive towards Verdi on the left, has anyone ever noticed that big cone? Anybody? I went to the top. That's me on top of that cone. It was not easy, but it was worth it. It's very loose rock up there, but you get to the top of it and it's super fun. Somebody told me about this thing called forest bathing, which is a Japanese concept that's kind of intriguing, and I like the forest. I went and mountain biking near Mendocino this summer, and I thought it was kind of like forest bathing, but the whole idea of spending a little time outside, and of course, trying not to stare at your phone, although I'm guilty of it when you're outside, it's a good idea. Leaving the technology behind is very renewing. Okay, next slide. So expressing your uniqueness. We all have some kind of creative streak. Maybe some of us are more talented than others, whatever. It doesn't matter. Express yourself in whatever way is true to you. If that's, you play an instrument, you just like to dance in the street, you're a skateboarder. I highly approve of skateboarding personally. Just because when my offspring is addicted to it, what am I going to do? He also loves graffiti. I approve of that too, if it's done legally. As such as in this picture, so a lot of cool art, or whatever it is you're into, but practicing your hobby and expressing yourself for yourself is very therapeutic. And so don't let that slide completely when you're in college. Next slide, please. Okay, so get involved. You're probably learning about this in other Nevada Fit sessions too, but I just want to reinforce the opportunities on campus for engagement. If you go to this website, Center for Student Engagement, shows you about all the ASUN clubs. Some of them are sports clubs, special interests. There's so many of them. That same website shows you volunteer opportunities. So doing a little something to help other people tends to make us feel better, interestingly, and help other people. That same website shows you a link to PAC provisions. If you can't afford food, it's there for you at PAC provisions. That's true of about 1 in 5 UNR students needs to use that service. There's nothing to be ashamed of there. So getting involved is a way to develop that sense of belonging, because this is a big campus. There's over 20,000 students. It would be normal to feel a little lost. Okay, next slide, please. Engage in civil, or sometimes we call it civic dialogue. What am I talking about here? Well, you're going to get a lot of opportunities in college to have debates and class conversations in which we try to be civil while talking about difficult subjects. Subjects we're really opinionated about, we may disagree strenuously about. For your own well-being and for the people around you, you want to develop this muscle of being able to listen to other people, even when you disagree with them, wait your turn, express yourself civilly, and learn to understand each other's point of view. It's good for like the nervous system. I mean, compare that kind of way of engaging to what we see on TV, where people are just yelling past each other and not listening, right? So this is a practice, a way of being that in which not only will you feel better, you'll learn more, and you may even start solving problems through this process of civic engagement, civil dialogue. Next slide. Okay. Have healthy relationships. Obviously, this matters a lot to me. I mentioned being sexually assaulted at a very young age. I don't want that to happen to anybody on this campus. If it already happened to one of you, I want to make sure you take care of yourself. Avoid that. So by healthy relationships, when I'm talking about sexual relationships, I mean consent and whatever is necessary for you, but please don't rape anyone or get raped. You never totally recover from that. You never will. And I hope the same is true of perpetrators that live with what they have done. But I'm talking more broadly than just sex. I'm talking about relationships in general, your friendships. And relationships can be a real source of strain. I mean, we all know you've been in an argument with a friend and it hurts and it bothers you and you want to resolve it. Or maybe you have a boyfriend, girlfriend, and things are going badly. So that's terrible for your well-being. So what can you do? You can bravely try to talk about what the problems are, and it may or may not help. Sometimes you have to decide to walk away. Sometimes something's toxic. You have to find other people. Maybe you want to cuddle your cute little dog. Guess whose cute little dog that is? Some of you probably miss your pets, but sometimes they bring them to the Joe for you to cuddle with. So I think if you're having problems with your relationships, of course, that's a great thing to talk to counselors about, but you want people to treat you with the same kind of respect that you treat them with. So be paying attention. If you're noticing that the people that you're relating to aren't treating you with the same decency that you use, do something about that. Okay, next slide, please. So these are all just sort of normal things I'm recommending for how to live life. But if things are not going well and you need extra support, this happens to everybody. And there's absolutely no shame in asking for help when you're really upset about something. So whoever it is that you talk to, go ahead and call them. Many of you don't need to hear this, but there might be some of you who do. And the one thing that sometimes people hesitate to reach out for help is because they think then they'll be indebted. But that's okay, then you can help them another time. So lastly, I just want to show you some resources on campus, just in case. If this isn't enough, you're starting to feel down. We have the Student Counseling Center. And next slide, please. They've provided me with these slides and go to the next one because, in fact, they asked me to include these slides so that anybody who felt like they wanted to talk to someone over there or join a group over there would know how to access their system. And you can go to the next slide. It shows you can, in a crisis, you can get scheduled the same day. They have in-person and remote counseling. Next slide, please. You can schedule online, which is more comfortable for some people. You can call them, you can walk in. So it is there. And don't hesitate to use it. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Don't wait till you reach the brink of insanity to really get help. I'm very proud of how much therapy has helped me, and I wouldn't be standing here if I hadn't had all those experts help me and work with me. And so there's absolutely nothing to be ashamed of if you end up going to help, or you may already have. So the next slide, please. So we don't have a whole lot of time left. We got a little late start, but I'm going to have some time. I do have some time here for your questions, but before that, I just want to say one last thing, because I sometimes talk about this subject in large groups, and I want you to know that it's to talk about your own mental illness is something you want to think about really cautiously before you do. I don't do this without a great deal of deliberation. I know that when I speak publicly about it, some people are going to judge me and think less of me. And that's okay, because I accept that that's the reality in our society. It's very stigmatized. It's just part of dealing with having a mental health history. It's a fact. I'm strong, so I talk about it. I don't want people to just whimsically decide to say it without being deliberate, because you can't take it back. So as I open the floor for any questions or thoughts that you might have, feel free to share. Do so, using your own judgment. And so now I open the floor. Any thoughts, any questions? Yes.
So if you're not looking for same day scheduling for like the counseling department, how can you make, is it only same day scheduling?
Oh, not at all.
Or can you do it in advance?
Not at all. You can go